Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Kelvin Song is tonight's facilitator. I'm the MC, and GLOBIS faculty and head of the marketing and data analysis team at the university. So without further ado, please, Kelvin, I'm going to throw it over to you to introduce tonight's speakers.
All right, thank you, George. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're connecting from. So again, my name is Kelvin, and I'll be the facilitator for today's panel session. Let me start by explaining why we do this webinar, right? Because some of you might be wondering why we talk about app development in the business school. But if you go to our website, actually, you see the word technovate, which is a combination of two words, technology and innovate. And GLOBIS focus a lot on technovate because we know that business leaders nowadays, we need to leverage technology to innovate our businesses. So today we have invited two very experienced IT professionals, Ado and Alex, to tell us how to create a successful app in 2021 from a management perspective. So let me quickly introduce them. So Ado is a naturalized Japanese, and he has 25 years of experience in the IT industry working for companies such as Google, Red Hat, and Rakuten. Ado has a lot of knowledge on engineering management, digital transformation, and software development. And he is currently the vice president of Raison Holdings. Alex is the leader of GLOBIS Unlimited, our online micro-learning service. Actually, Alex and I joined GLOBIS around the same time, and we started off being in the same team, launching the online MBA program in English. But since then, he has led the planning and development of GLOBIS Unlimited from scratch as an intrapreneur, combining technology and education with a global reach. Right, Josh, could you please go to the next slide?
Yep, that's it for the slides for now, for the introductions.
So let us put our hands together to welcome Ado for his presentation.
Okay,
all
great. Should I speak? Yep.
Go ahead.
All right. First of all, let's see. Man, that's kind of a tough on that. Seeing that slide of me from a couple of years ago, and now seeing me in reality on this picture. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me slightly reintroduce myself and give some context. Yeah, it's true that I was at Google as an engineering manager for about 5 years. I was an engineering manager and all sorts of various managers at Red Hat for about 10 years. I was also a producer at Rakuten. And in addition to all those name brand companies, I have been worked at a lot of very, very small startups. One thing that all of my work experience has in common is all of my work experience was based in Japan. So when I talk about, oh, it's like this at Red Hat, or it's like that at Google, or it's like this in startups, I'm talking from a perspective of in Japan. So when they asked me about producing your first app in a company and 3 things I learned the hard way, one thing all of you, and I'm taking it for granted that most of you, hold on, I'm going to share my slides now. Let's see, tell me if you can see these. Can everybody see this?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. So I decided that, a lot of you have probably read all the textbooks on how to do proper project management. You've probably learned about Agile. You've probably learned about the Kanban method, and you've probably learned about Scrum and extreme programming. And, and if you haven't, that's okay. You can learn those in courses, and you can learn those in textbooks and all that. But what I wanted to do is talk about the things that they don't teach you in textbooks. And that I've learned the hard way from my personal experience. Like, if you go into a big mega corporation that does nothing but software and takes software to the highest standards, for example, like Google and all that, it's a pretty safe bet that all of them will probably be doing, Agile by the book, and they'll have their processes all done by the book, and everything will be perfect. However, if you join a much smaller company, in a startup that is like making their very first app, or perhaps they made one app and it didn't quite work out so well, so they hired you as a experienced app developer to do it properly and all that, and bring it in and all that. A lot of much smaller companies and much younger companies, and to put it bluntly, a lot of very traditionally Japanese companies that are just beginning their conversion from analog digital will not quite be up to snuff with regarding to the processes and all this. So basically, you're going to inherit not just legacy tech, but legacy processes when you join a small company. For example, although all of them will say externally on their job descriptions when you join that, oh, we do Agile, or, oh, we're looking for somebody, or a project manager or a product manager that has Agile experience and all that. Everybody says that. Everybody wants Agile. However, you will soon find when you join smaller companies that are just trying to start up and all that, they don't really know what Agile is, or it's something they aspire to. I guarantee if you go to LinkedIn or go to Wantedly and all that, 99, well, I'd probably say 90% of them probably say Agile somewhere in their job description, and about 50% of them, I'd say, are lying. Now, they aren't lying on purpose. You know, they want to be Agile, or they think they're Agile, but they're not. Like, for example, they think that, oh, well, we have a meeting every day that is 15 minutes long, and Agile says you should have a daily meeting 15 minutes long, therefore we're Scrum, we're Agile. But in reality, the Scrum process is a little more complicated than that. Or let's say, oh yeah, we're very Agile. Some companies, you know, have a 4-week length Scrum cycle. Ours is just 1 week. That means we're the most Agile at all. That's not how Scrum works. You choose a Scrum length depending on the needs of your project. You know, 1 week is not necessarily better than 4 weeks or anything like that. So what will probably happen when you go into your a young company that's converting over, they'll start with a legacy processes, and it'll probably be, as you can guess from this picture, the waterfall method. You know, you first start in the design phase, and then you hit a milestone, and then you can't return back to the previous process, and you go to the implementation, and you do this and this and this. Now, a lot of software engineers, when they come out of school, they've been taught that waterfall is bad, waterfall is evil. And if you do waterfall, your experience of doing process development is more like this, rather than being something a little bit more smooth. But the reality is sometimes, depending on the project, you might not have a choice. You might have to work with waterfall due to the nature of the resources you've been given with. For example, a good example is, let's say you go into a small startup, and it is a brick and mortar shop, and they're trying to convert over to an e-commerce system, and they are want to make a mobile app to do their e-commerce, and they just hired you as their first project manager, and they want to do their first app in about 2 months, but they haven't hired a software developer yet. So because they don't have a software developer for you to tell how to do your systems, you will probably have to outsource your development to a third party. And you'll probably do something with something, like, for example, like a Gyomu Itaku, or a contractor-based contract, where that contractor, and you might not have a choice of which contractor you get to choose. It might be a buddy-buddy relationship with the president who's getting a good deal from a friend, so there's not really room to negotiate. But the nature of like Gyomu Itaku is that everything that you can tell the contractor to do has to be all spelled out in a contract, and then handed off, and then they implement it, and there'll probably be one more phase for project approval, and then a stamp off, and then payment done. And due to the nature of the project, of the contract, you as a project manager might not be allowed to, for example, directly communicate with the individual developers that are actually implementing your app. Even if the developers themselves want to, and they want to do it via Slack, and you want to, it's contractually a no-no. They said, well, no, the contract says you are supposed to deliver as per the waterfall, the specifications, let's say in June, and then we give you the first prototype in August, and then you test, and if you give the thumbs up, it's in September, and then we're done. So you will have to deal with that sort of reality when you work at a smaller firm. Now, the good news is when you do these processes, when you first come in and things aren't perfect and you do your first rev, that's really a learning experience where you can say, okay, well, you have these legacy processes, and most likely, even if the version 1.0 of the app wasn't done perfectly the way that proper project management should be done, we can take notes and I can proper feedback, and we can prepare for version 2 or perhaps the next app. And by that time, you will have hired maybe a much larger software development staff, and you will have earned trust within the corporation. So your superiors are more likely to give you a little more trust as to doing it a different way. For example, adding more and more proper agile processes to make everything work. Another thing to think about is that if you're working on version 2.0, if you're brought in because they already made one version of an app, and version 2.0 of the app wasn't quite the hit they wanted to, and they're blaming the process, and you're coming over to fix it and all that. Even if you want to do everything all with proper processes and proper software development and all that, sometimes what you've been handed with to improve will be very, very difficult to work with. And the reason for that is because the people that were doing the app prior to you weren't doing proper processes, so they didn't really have a system in place for proper continuity. I'll give an example from a previous company I worked at. The previous app, the version 1.0 part of that, they did it, they released it, and as part of the agreement, they left me with a USB thumb drive that had a big zip file that supposedly had all the source code from the previous app so that we could continue development with a new process and all that. And then lo and behold, you plug in the zip drive into the thing and look at the contents, and the actual code, it's there. Parts of it are missing. They're missing key files for needing to build things. They're missing key configuration files. And they basically left you with a big tarball of a mess of a source code that you really can't work with and decipher. And frankly, it's easier just to start from scratch in those particular cases. So that leads me to my next thing, is that when you go into a new team. Oh, by the way, I'm going to take a tangent here, and I just want to point out that most software developers do not look as handsome as the person, this well-dressed guy with the man bun in this photo here. He is way, way, way too photogenic, and you can see how his keyboard is far away from his desk, and he's barely typing on it. That's not what, and his desk is way too clean. So we know for a fact that this guy here is not a real software developer. Though it could be worse. You know, your software development team that you initially inherit could be something like this. In other words, somebody that wants to be a software developer, somebody that really inspires to be a software developer, and maybe they learned a little bit of PHP somewhere in a book, and they cobbled together the company's first website, and then the boss of the company forced them to basically use like a low-code method to make their first application, and they didn't really know what they're doing, and then they cried for help, and then they brought you on a team. And so they say, okay, congratulations, you're the product manager, you're the project manager. Now all you need to do is coach this one person on how to make a proper application. The reality is, a lot of times the team that you initially inherit will be lacking the skill set to make the ideal app you will want to do. And this is where, again, this is something they don't teach you in the textbooks about product development, project management. This is politics. So basically, you don't want to badmouth your team, and you don't want to badmouth even the previous contractors and all that. You need to finesse it in such a way that you talk to your superiors and say, hey, well, you know what? I've done an assessment of our current team. They have these skill sets, and to make the next version of the app, we need these skill sets. You don't want to leave anybody out of loop. I think what we can do is I can take this current monkey we have, don't call him a monkey, but we can take this current developer we have, and we can use them, for example, to make the HTML forms that allow you to create a site or allow you to submit a tech trouble thing. But we're going to need this developer and this developer and this developer in order to make version 2.0 of this application possibly happen. Yeah, politics is a very, very, very important skill that they don't teach enough of in product management and product management school. They'll teach you Scrum and all that, but they don't teach you what to do if you don't get the ideal team and you don't get your ideal resources. Even when you come in and you're interviewing and you ask, oh, what type of did he have a proper software development team and all that? The recruiter will probably tell you yes. And it's not because the recruiter is lying to you or intentionally lying to you. They aren't a tech person themselves, that they just aren't aware. They assume that the team they have is more than adequate. And part of your first job when you first get into the company will be to assess everything and see that, where the skills are, where the skills aren't, what type of budget you've given, what type of timeline you've been given, and what you can do and what type of compromises you should make for your first iteration of your app, and then have a roadmap on how to not just beef up the processes, but also beef up the staffing and skill set. There's a saying, you can win the battle, but lose the war. And that is true of product management. Sometimes for your very first version of a product, you might have the so-called MVP, the minimum viable product, that determines you try to make the minimum amount of product that you can get out the door, which will be acceptable for the customer. You also have to think about your minimum viable team and your minimum viable budget as well when you do your first rev. The key is, if you do the first rev and you don't burn any bridges and you earn trust within your current team and you earn trust within your supervisors, that'll allow you to negotiate for more resources and better skill sets when you iterate for the second version of your app. So that brings me to the next part is the one thing that when you first get into a new company making the first app, and when you first, or if you're inheriting a process that's broken, is they will think their security is good. However, very few small companies think about security from a full stack. In other words, thinking about security during all phases of the development process. It's important, and they don't really put enough emphasis on security, even things that they think are not part of the mobile applications business. For example, let me talk about email. So you'll probably have an app that comes out. And with this app, there will be email campaigns that will probably use like MailChimp or email promotional campaigns. There'll be a form where you submit for technical questions or technical support, and then the email is sent from all this and this. And they might not even know it, but their email might be misconfigured. It might not have the proper DKIM set up or SPF or DMARC headers, or they send email too much so it's spammy. They don't realize that that is part of the security equation. Things like Google, for example, Google will link the reputation of your email domain address with your website and also with your app. So if your app is published under a specific domain And that same domain with, like, for example, Google Workspaces is spamming people and pressing on the report spam button on the email. That will actually not just decrease the reliability of that particular domain's email, but it will also decrease the trust and the reputation of the website for SEO, and also for the application itself, for how easily it will appear in the search results for when they're looking for the app to install. Does anybody recognize this photo? So this photo is all the 7&I employees bowing for an apology after the 7Pay app. If you don't know what 7Pay is, it's kind of like PayPay and all the other QR code payment systems. 7-Eleven had a application, but they never really considered two-factor authentication or mobile authentication as part of their security model, and they were promptly hacked all the heck, and their reputation was so shot that they didn't have really a chance to make version 2.0 of 7Pay. They actually had to take their payment system and yank it from the market, which means, like, Family Mart has their own payment system, FamiPay, and everybody else has their own payment system. 7-Eleven is the only one without it, because they didn't really consider take security that important. So I've told you a lot about compromise on, for example, your initial team that you're given, compromise the initial budget and all this. If I was going to say on your version 1.0, when you first get into a new startup, the one thing that I would put your foot down and not compromise on is security. You can compromise on features, you can compromise on gloss, and you can compromise on everything, but if you mess up once on security, it's game over. There will be no version 2.0 of your app. So in conclusion, successfully launching an app in a non-tech requires a balance of tech skill, negotiation skills with legacy players, and it's important to be pragmatic. So don't worry too much about getting the first iteration perfect, but make sure you're set up from a technical and a budget, so your political ends can improve the app over time, and then eventually transition over to an internal team if possible. It's important to make sure your non-tech stakeholders understand the importance of good security and good privacy, in addition to their marketing-oriented goals, which I'm sure it'll give you. And you can, and the best way to communicate security is like what I just showed you. If you explain it to them, hey, we don't want to be like 7-Eleven and 7Pay. If we don't do this, we can end up like this other Japanese company. And that's a language that even non-technical people can understand. So that's it for me. I guess I'll be taking questions a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Edu. Alex, could you please go next?
Can you see my screen all right?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here tonight. Let me give a little bit of a different perspective from Edo a little bit. I think Edo came up as an engineer with a software engineering background to product manager. I came up more from a business background to a product manager. So let me kind of give my own perspective based upon this. And before I jump in, I want to frame things a little bit as entrepreneurs versus entrepreneurs, because what kind of company, where you're making the product, it really makes a very big difference about how you proceed with that. So let me first talk about entrepreneurs. This is a startup. This is somebody who has full ownership of the product, its outcomes, and everything. It's a bit like building an experimental plane from scratch. Now, what are the pros behind this? Well, you have complete freedom to build the absolute best plane that you need for your market, for your users, with what you can do, or the best app that you need to build for your users. But what are the cons about this? Well, it's really difficult and expensive to build planes, quite simply. And there's already a lot of companies that are already making planes. And you can say the same thing for apps as well. Chances are, if somebody's thought of it, then somebody's already built it. So you really need to think about this as well. Also, it's expensive. You need to get funding. You don't have existing customers, you don't have existing sources of revenue, but you do have complete freedom. If you're an entrepreneur, however, if you are working at an existing company and you are setting up, for example, creating a new app or creating a new division at an existing company, it's a bit like putting an experimental engine on a plane. Now, what are the pros here? Well, the plane's already in the air. There's already people on the plane, and hopefully they're paying for the plane. So you already should have customers. You already have a theoretical business line running. You maybe have sales and marketing teams, operations. So you already have the necessary infrastructure to put the plane in the air and get people on the plane. But what are the cons? Well, those are the cons. There's people piloting and riding on that plane, and despite your best intentions, they're none too happy about you probably attaching an experimental engine to that plane. So in the best case scenario, maybe the experimental engine takes off, the plane gets to its destination faster than usual. Medium, maybe it doesn't do anything. Worst case scenario, there's an explosion and it brings down the rest of your business line. You have to make an emergency landing or something like that somewhere. So you really have to think carefully when you're working at an existing company, because you're not creating something from scratch. You have these existing businesses. Ado mentioned about 7&i Holdings trying to create a payment app. Well, they have a very existing, successful line of convenience store businesses as well. And they don't want to risk the damage and the reputation to those by building a shoddy application. So my experience is over here, the entrepreneurial side of things, starting up within an existing organization. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit about this. Now, I want to first talk about the necessary skill sets for driving innovation in the digital era. We can say we need three things: business, creative, and technology skills. Business being, will it make money? Can we make a business out of it? Creative and design. Are people actually going to use this? Can we design a great experience, a great interface so that people are going to use this? And then technology, will it actually run? We need to combine all of these things. Well, I'm sorry, actually, that was a lie. We need four. Domain expertise is absolutely crucial. Every field, from medicine to education, everything's going digital. If you're working for a medical services company and you don't know anything about the medicine industry and you try to create an app, you're going to fail because you don't know the domain. You don't have the necessary expertise. If you are working in education and you're trying to create great online digital education experiences, you need to know about traditional education in order to do those. We're connecting with Zoom right now. The people who are making Zoom, they need to understand about webinars. They need to understand about business meetings and how to build great digital experiences to deliver those things. So technology itself has never solved problems by itself. We need the domain expertise in order to really create great digital experiences. And I apologize again, the previous slide, that was an even bigger lie. Why is that? Nobody has all of these skills at a high level. Nobody knows business, domain, technology, creative. If you do, you're probably making a 6-figure, 7-figure salary. You're probably not here. Nobody has these things. So what we talk about T. We talk about T learners here in education. T learning meaning you have breadth plus depth. And ideally, you have depth in maybe one of these things, two of these things, with a broad understanding of maybe all of them. Because ideally, you have kind of deep level understanding of maybe one or two of these things, but you need to communicate across all of these things. And to be a great digital leader, you need to communicate across business. You need to talk with the creative designers. You need to talk with the engineers. You need to talk with the domain experts, bring it all together. So in order to create great digital experiences, you need communication skills. And I don't touch upon this a little bit when he said, they don't teach you these things. They teach you Scrum, they teach you Agile, they teach you Waterfall, but they don't teach you how to the office politics about building a great team, bringing a team together. So it's really this overarching communication skill that's so necessary. So how do we do this at an existing company? First, we need to understand existing processes, relationships, and tools at the company. So ideally, your company already has existing businesses. They already have tools and relationships in order to do those businesses. You need to understand those first before you can change them. Once you understand them, you need to communicate. Next, you need to leverage the strengths and synergies from your existing company resources. One of the things that you have working for an existing company that a startup doesn't have is existing resources. You have money, you have hopefully personnel, you have technology, maybe you have some kind of patents, or maybe you have some kind of existing domain expertise that you can leverage. Find out what these are, make use of them, and create advantage. And then once you do, communicate. But then finally, you need to go beyond what you've previously offered. You need to create new value that goes beyond your previous business offerings, because there's really no point in starting up a new business if you're just going to offer what you've previously offered. So you need to figure out what you can add upon this that goes beyond that. And then you need to communicate again. It's so essential to communicate at every step of this. So what's unique to digital products throughout this kind of experience right here? I'm going to give 3 tips or 3 points that echo a little bit of what Ido says, but I'm going to give them in my own kind of perspective. Number 1, start small and iterate, communicate with your users. Number 2, listen to your designers and engineers, communicate with your team. And number 3, finally, change your company mindset, communicate with your company. So start small and iterate, communicate with your users. Despite what I said at the beginning, digital products are not experimental airplanes. Nobody is going to get into a half-finished airplane. I don't even know, this thing's not even going to take off. It's still in the factory, so no one's going to get in this thing. Plenty of people will use beta products. So the problem is with a lot of companies is a lot of companies try to build the absolute perfect digital products from the get-go. They try to make, version 1.0 what should have been version 5.0, and try to cram every necessary feature, make it absolutely perfect from the get-go, because that's what they've done in the past, because they know they only had one shot at release. But with digital experiences, it's completely different. You need to build the core functionality. You need to start small, listen to your users, launch 1.0, figure out what the necessary things are. We talk about the MVP, the minimum viable product, and start small, and then listen to your users. Gather feedback, because now you have the opportunity. 20 years ago, you never had the opportunity to have people fly in experimental planes. Now we can launch an app in a day and start gathering feedback right now. This is a unique opportunity with digital experiences. And so many companies fail at this because they don't take advantage of this unique opportunity. Second is listen to your designers and your engineers. You'll likely have existing marketing and sales infrastructure. They will rely too much on business people to make decisions. Hopefully, you will be hiring designers and engineers, or working with designers and engineers. Let these people be the ones that create the product. They will be the ones creating the product. So let them make the decisions. If you have marketing and sales people making the decisions, you will succeed really well in the short term. I guarantee you will do fantastic in the short term, because you will have a lot of initial sales for your product. But ultimately, it can lead to short-sighted product decisions. So ideally, you listen very carefully to the marketing and sales people, because these are very important people. They will be the one marketing and selling your product, but they're not the ones building it. So you need to listen to the designers and engineers. Make clear the why of what you're doing, and the why is, what business impact does this have? Who is this for? How does this connect to our strategy? But involve them. What features do we make? How do we build this? If you go to the salespeople and ask what features they will make, well, they say, well, competitor has feature A and feature B inside of this. We want feature A and feature B for our software. But a lot of times, feature A isn't necessarily in line with the experience that we're trying to design. And feature B, that's not even technically possible. So if you try to design the product in this way, it can often lead to a lot of mistakes for the product development. So really engage your product development team. Listen to your designers and engineers. Give them the necessary inputs to make the right decisions about the what and the how. And then finally, you need to change your company mindset. You need to communicate with your company. Existing organizational structures will not work with digital products. Existing company policies will not work with designers and engineers. I work with a lot of talented designers and engineers. They have a lot of wonderful career opportunities at a lot of companies. So we need to create environments that they want to work at, and places where they can excel. Existing infrastructure will not support scaling digital services. Ido mentioned the importance of security. And security, when you're working with, papers in a filing cabinet, is very different when you are working with, hundreds of thousands of user data online. So we really need to change the infrastructure that we have when we talk about digital services. So we need to change how our company operates in order to change the value that's created. Is this easy to do? Absolutely not. This is incredibly difficult to do. The CEO cannot do this. Upper management cannot do this. This is very difficult to do. So what you need to do is likely, nobody is, unless you are the CEO, is in a position to make this kind of change. So what you need to do, you need to gather the facts. You need to prioritize the issues. You need to find out who the right stakeholders are, and then you need to convince them in order to bring small change, because you can't fix everything, but you need to think about what you need to fix, what you need to make right within your organization in order to create great digital experiences. So let me just kind of sum up a little bit here. Your job as an innovator should be to make people uncomfortable at your existing organization. It's really scary when you're launching a new line of business. A lot of times you have a fantastic existing line of business, and now you're saying, well, let's disrupt that. Let's try something new. Let's create new value. It's going to make a lot of people at your company uncomfortable if you say, we're going to start something new. But your job as a great digital leader is to communicate until those people who are uncomfortable, until they become your allies, because you need every ally that you have, you can create in order to make these great digital experiences. If you don't, you're going to keep making the Wright brothers glider. Nothing will evolve beyond this when you're really trying to create a rocket that's going to go into space. And if you bring this idea to the people that made this glider, they're going to be surprised, they're going to be uncomfortable, but you need to be the instrument of change. So anyone can create great digital services. People are doing this all the time online. Every day there's a new app coming out. The App Store is flooded with fantastic ideas. The thing is that they don't make money. They're just out there. They don't have users, they don't make money. So it takes great communication and leadership skills in order to turn that service into a business. So my advice is to become a great digital leader. Just communicate, talk to everyone, make sure that everyone's on the same page. It's the most important skill set that you can have. So that ends myself here. I will turn it over to Kelvin, I think, and we can move into the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Edo and Alex, for your wonderful presentations. I mean, there are a lot of practical tips that we don't find in textbooks. So thank you a lot. Let's start with well, actually, after listening to your presentations, I have a lot more questions, but we have limited time. So let me just start with the one general question. The title of this webinar is How to Create a Successful App in 2021. So how would you define what a successful app is, and what are the factors do you think that would make an app successful? So Edo or Alex? Okay, Edo, you have this.
Want me to go first? Okay. So as crazy as this sounds, for your first version, your successful app, just actually getting it out the door, I would call that a success. In my experience, 90% of most apps that are started in-house never ever launch, either because they run out of money, they find out they don't have the skill sets. And by the way, this is not just with a small company too. And I worked at Google, right? And believe it or not, even at Google, I'd say they make 10 apps internally. For every 10 apps, 9 of them are never ever launched. They get canceled before they even leave the door. And it's not because, obviously, it's not because Google doesn't have any money or they don't have any skilled software engineers. It's because like marketing priorities or change, or maybe the team just finished it, but it messes up the marketing message of another app that's about to launch and all that. So the getting it out the door, the first one, is probably the first metric I would use to judge success, just based on the fact that 90% of most apps that people try to work on will never ever see the light of day. In other words, being released in an app store.
Thank you, Edo. Alex, what do you think?
I echo exactly what Ido just said, is that done is better than perfect. And it's doubly more so when you're talking about apps, is that just put it out there, start gathering feedback. And that's the most important way we can start seeing whether it's successful or not. Because ultimately, it's the users that are going to decide whether an app is successful or not. It's not something that we decide when we're creating it. Obviously, we have our KPIs and we have our business goals in mind. But until we get the application out there, we're not going to know whether it's successful or not. Until we have actual users, we're not going to we're not going to be able to verify the various hypotheses that we have regarding the application itself. So I think just getting it out there is the first big step to releasing something, but not just getting it out there, having a plan for once it's out there. How are we going to measure this as a success? And for every application, it's different. It depends on what your goals are, because I think that, as we've seen over the past 5 years, a lot of things are developing without necessarily needing to make money at the initial outset. A lot of times it's about just creating awareness or gathering users, and we'll figure out how to, monetize this at a later date. So it's about understanding, what the purpose is for you releasing this app, what the purpose is for you creating this digital experience. And then once you have that, just get it out there. Done's better than perfect. We have a comment right here. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of the product, you have launched too late. Exactly. So just get out there, get embarrassed, get some negative feedback, but don't compromise in areas that will hurt your company.
So when you say don't compromise areas that will hurt your company, was exactly what Ado mentioned, right? Security is one of them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Because you're going to be, we're going to be creating these initial experiences, but you can have a not so great initial experience with the application, but you cannot have a not so great initial experience with the application that leaks customer data onto the internet, because you will lose all trust in your business going forward.
All right. Allow me to follow up this question, dig deeper to this question. So we have been talking about Agile. We have been talking about the difference between Agile and Waterfall. So Agile, as I understand it, is to try to get apps, try to iterate your development process as fast as possible, right? So get your apps out to the market, get user feedback, and try to improve it. So when you try to launch your first version of your app, definitely it's not going to be perfect, right? But what should you compromise and what should you not compromise? Yeah, we talked about security, but what else can you compromise and what else can you not compromise? What do you think?
Do you mean like within Agile or within anything else? Anything else?
Within, well, yeah, within Agile then, yeah.
So Agile is a big umbrella term for a lot of different processes, and most people are familiar with Scrum, Kanban, and then there's extreme programming, and then there's subdivisions of pair programming and all that. It's not just one size fits all. I find with starter teams or with teams that never had any process before, Kanban is normally the best thing to start people off with that never had a process before, because it's the simplest. And you can even do things like, I apologize for that background noise, by the way, but the simplest process, sometimes like in Kanban, you're supposed to have a waterline for the, to do, in process, in done columns. And there's a waterline where you're like, for example, okay, I have 3 developers and I should only have 2 post-it notes in the in process line, and then there is in the bucket for the in development, and then there's the water line. And then if you go over that, you're overloaded and all that. But even, just like removing that line and just simplifying things and things until people get used to having more formal process, and then certainly do it. So I'd argue that, it's funny because I'm making myself into being a liar, because I just slammed all these companies as not really being agile, and nobody does Agile properly. And now I'm telling everybody to do Agile improperly. But you should know that you're doing Agile improperly, and with a goal of eventually getting to the process. Sometimes you want to compromise on some parts of the Agile process when it's a learning process, little small baby steps, and gradually add a little more process when your developers and the rest of your team get more comfortable with it.
Thank you, Edo. Alex, do we really need Agile?
So let me just kind of share a little bit of background, maybe if some of the audience here hasn't heard of some of these kind of development methodologies. But basically, there's a lot of kind of project management methodologies when it comes to creating software. And Agile is one of these things. It's an iterative process. And there's many other ways to do so. There's waterfall, which takes things, very traditional kind of project management, where you stake out the scope, the requirements, develop, test, release. There's many, many different ways to move forward a software project. And the answer is none of these is good. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what your team is capable of. So, just like, we gotta, you go to an MBA, you learn a lot of business frameworks. It's not about what those frameworks are. That's not the problem. The problem is not learning those frameworks. The problem is applying those to an actual business situation. So you need to choose the correct methodology and the correct framework that's going to fit not only the product that you're trying to develop, and actually the product that you are trying to develop with the least of your worries. You need to think about your organizational capability, your team, your own ability to manage as well, and then choose the right framework that's going to fit those. So if I said, is Agile the right choice? All of these are incorrect. It's which of these is less incorrect and which of these is going to lead you to the best outcomes. So just like any other kind of thing, it's choosing the right tool for the job.
I'd like to add something to this, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
So as you know, I'm not young, and when I graduated, I got a degree in computer science back in 1993. Agile didn't exist, and and it's just waterfall was just starting to be introduced in these software engineering textbooks. When I first joined Google in 2008, they actually, most of the teams, even though they knew Agile did exist, and most of the software engineers and product managers knew what Agile existed, most of the teams weren't really using any type of Agile process. Nowadays, now I have a 20-year-old daughter, and she is currently in her second year in university, and she is studying to be a 3D digital artist. That means, technical artists, like doing 3D animations and all that, like a Pixar or AAA video games and all that. She is neither studying to be a product manager nor a software engineer. And she was actually upstairs. I'm not actually at my office. This is actually where I am on a green screen. But, and I noticed in her curriculum as a 3D artist, she was studying Agile and Scrum methodology, even though she's neither a software engineer nor a 3D artist, because the university in years 2021, they're actually teaching like technical artists, okay, you're probably going to work with a product manager or a project manager or an engineering manager, and they're probably going to put you in a Scrum methodology. So the fact that my daughter is 20 years old and it is now part of her core college curriculum, I would argue that you could probably expect going forward, things move a lot faster, that even among the non-software engineering, proper Agile process will be a little more of a household word than it was just 5 or 10 years ago.
Thank you, Edo. And let us look at apps from a different angle. In GLOBIS, especially in my course, we always say that analysis is comparison. So when we compare successful apps, let us compare also bad apps. So let us talk about bad apps. We have seen many bad applications in the market. For example, those applications that are on the App Store, which is rated like 2.0 out of 5. The usability is totally atrocious. So what are some of the factors do you think that contributed to these bad applications? Alex?
Let me just kind of jump back and say, what's a bad app? And my guess is a bad app is one that doesn't achieve the goals of the creator, or that doesn't bring about the necessary business impact that they want to do. And traditionally, you get a lot of maybe 5, 10 years ago, I think people were willing to put up with not so great digital experiences with their in a lot of aspects of their lives. Maybe when they went to register for classes or when they went to pay their bills or something like that, they were willing to put up with bad systems. But now there's so many great choices for great digital experiences that people are just not willing to put up with bad experiences online. When they order food, when they book a trip, when you take classes online, there's a lot of great ways to experience this. So I think that, if people have choices, then they will naturally gravitate to the ones that have better experiences or something like that. However, if you can fulfill a niche that needs to be filled, then it doesn't matter, maybe how great your user experience is or how great the coding is or something like that. If you can fulfill that certain market segment, then maybe you can have a good app that's not necessarily the slickest thing in the world. I'll give an example. There's a lot of competition for food delivery services. So when you create a new app for food delivery, you better have a great experience with that application. I'm into film photography. I take film photography. I do film photography. I have an app right here to you can't see that very well, to check my old film cameras and see if they're working properly. This app is a terrible user interface, but I have no problem using it because it fulfills exactly what I want it to do, and it fulfills a niche. And I don't expect a great user experience for this. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and it depends on what market you are trying to enter, who your target user is, what your capabilities are.
Thank you, Alex. Edo?
So if I was to give a simple answer as to what is the connection between bad applications, I would say outsourcing. I use the word 90% probably way too much. Whenever I say the word 90%, that means it's my personal opinion, but it means most everything. 90% of most bad apps that you've had experience with are probably due to outsourcing. And I'm not saying outsourcing can't make a good app. I'm saying here's what generally happens. You have a company that wants to be digital. Maybe they're a traditional brick and mortar thing. They don't have their own software engineering team. They don't know anything about software engineering. All they know is they've been told that if they don't have their own app, they're hopelessly behind the times and they better do something quick, and they don't know what to do. Now, there is a whole industry of outsourcing companies that take advantage of the anxiety that these type of companies have. And they basically, the app isn't bad, but it's cookie cutter. In other words, they take the same, to lower their development costs, they will take a traditional brick and mortar thing and it'll say, hey, you don't have to pay an arm and leg to have your own app. Just show us what your company does in your store, and we can have an app made for you, and then they don't even have to listen to the requirements and specs within 6 weeks for XXXXX amount of yen. No questions asked. And they think, oh, what a deal. This is great. And then they sign the dotted line and they put out the app, and it looks personalized. They got the company app logo and all that. But in reality, it doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, it's just, a warmed over version of a website in the form of an app with maybe a customer support form, which is basically just saying an email in the background, and maybe shows a lot of their products on the end. So I'd say that most things that we consider to be bad apps, it's normally because outsourcing is a cause, and outsourcing doesn't necessarily make bad apps. It's just that one of the things that outsourcing does is they provide cookie cutter templates for a lot of companies that don't know what they want, or they're not really to invest the time and the effort to make a proper app. And that's often because they don't know any better.
Edo, yeah, that is very interesting that 90%, as you said, come from outsourcing. But a lot of companies do not have the resources to develop their apps in-house, right? So if they were to outsource, what are some of the ways to mitigate this problem?
Well, you generally want a product manager, project manager that there's different types that has prior experience in software engineering or making a mobile app. So even if the company itself doesn't have its own software development team yet or ever, that product manager or project manager will have the experience and the prudence to know how, when they sign up with their third-party outsourcer or contractor, to be able to write the contract and write the specifications and all that, so they get a lot more hands-on control, and maybe perhaps the specifications are written very clearly, so you don't end up having the contractor write a cookie cutter app. So the project manager who's controlling the outsourcer, if outsourcing is your only choice, and I'm assuming the project manager will be the audience here, needs to have prior experience in software engineering or in mobile app development, so that it can communicate the requirements and communicate the process as crystal clear on paper in writing as possible to that place they're contracting with.
Thank you, Edo. I actually have a lot more questions to ask, but I already see that there are a lot of questions from the audience. So why not we go to the Q&A section and open up to the floor for Q&A?
Yeah, perfect. I will share my screen and then we can see the questions. I have shared the slide link in the chat before, so those of you who have not yet asked your questions, please feel free to go ahead. And if you see questions you like, give them a thumbs up. So, Kelvin, here it is, and feel free to take it away.
All right, so let's start with the first question right at the top. If a startup company wants to recruit an engineer without engineering knowledge, how can we evaluate he or she is good? Do you have any good question to evaluate him or her? Who would like to take this question?
This is difficult. This is a difficult question because it's very difficult to evaluate somebody without that necessary experience. But ultimately, these people are going to be, somebody who is coming into your team. So even if you can't go deep into technical knowledge, communication skills, culture fit, and whether they can grow with you are something that you definitely can understand. I think that, once they join the team and once you start working with them, and maybe once you start building an engineering team, you're going to figure out whether they're that attractive guy with a ponytail or whether they're a monkey. But you might not be able to know that at first, but at least you will know whether they are a communicative and team playing monkey, which is maybe better than a guy with a ponytail and a bad attitude. So it's just like hiring any other employee. It's very difficult to assess people based upon kind of domain specific knowledge. This not just for engineers, but anything, designers, data scientists, some kind of very marketing functions and things like that. It's very difficult to do so. So just evaluate them like you do any other member of the team, assess for fit, and hopefully find somebody that can grow with you.
Right. Yeah, it's the first engineer you hire will probably be your seed that you will use, and that person will probably be in the interviews for all subsequent engineers to make sure that they're a tech fit and they have a proper skill set. So the first engineer you should hire you should pay a little bit more than you're comfortable with and all that, and make sure through formal processes that you know that they can actually code. Believe it or not, there's a whole lot of resumes out there where even with people with supposedly senior experience that claim they can code, but they can't. There is a very, very old list called Joel's 10 Rules about basically what you want to do to have a successful software company. And one of the critical things they let's say is as part of your interview process, you should actually, and I know software engineers, they hate this as part of the interview process, but you should make sure they can code. Just because they have on their resume that they worked at a software company previously, believe it or not, does not mean they will be able to code on your team for whatever reason or ever. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. And if you don't have the skills yourself to verify if somebody is code literate, there's a lot of third-party software out there, web-based, that you can use as part of your HR process to do it yourself. For example, HackerRank, LeetCode, Codility. There's even a bunch of Japanese services so that the questions that are part of the software process can be either in English or Japanese. So if you don't know whether or not the first engineer you hire can actually code or not, and so you can't ask him coding questions, you don't have anybody else to do it, I would use a third-party service. Do not rely on what the resume says, and do not rely on what the scout, the recruiter says. Oh yeah, sure, yeah, they can code and all that, because they might think they're telling the truth, but you could end up getting burned badly.
Thank you, Edo. All right, the second question is from Eric. He says he's asking, how long should you wait for users, and how many users should be considered successful? Is there a rule of thumb? I think he's talking about app development.
I'm looking at Alex's face to see if he's going to answer first. So
you go ahead this time. Go ahead.
Okay. Success should generally be your criteria for success should generally be defined as a KPI, a key performance indicator, and those should be specified before the app is launched. And your KPIs should be, this is a corny acronym, but it's a very good acronym, SMART, S-M-A-R-T. It should be specific, measurable, reasonable, timely. Which one did I miss? S-M-A-R, yeah, whatever. But the point is that a good KPI would be something that's very specific and reasonable. Say within the first 3 months, we should have like XXX daily active users for this particular application, because that's measurable, specific, and it should also be reasonable. That now, when you define these rules for success, like considered successful and all that, sometimes you can have the best app in the world, but if there's no marketing behind it, if you don't have your marketing team roped in and you're not advertising the app, and you're not actually spending money for like on Google AdWords or to get it pushed up in a promotion on the thing, and you're going to cheap out and say, oh, well, our app is so awesome that we're just going to rely on it being a success through viral word of mouth and by how many tweets and spam messages that are email thing, you're probably not going to succeed. So my answer is, number one, you should have KPIs even before the app is launched. And when you make these KPIs, you need to do them in tandem, not just with the engineering team and your boss, but also with the marketing team, and make sure the marketing team is responsible for the success too, so that after you make the good app, you know that the marketing team was willing to put in the money to properly promote the app so that people install it and use it.
Thank you, Edo. Alex, you have anything to add?
No, exactly what Edo just said is that there's kind of this idea with apps or something like that if you put it out there, they will come. Yeah. You know, you put it on the App Store and you're going to get a ton of users. That's never happened.
Google can do that.
Yeah.
You can't. Most ordinary people cannot. And every once in a while, there's an app person that doesn't do any marketing and strikes it rich with no marketing, and they become a millionaire and all that. And every company in the world thinks, oh, well, we can be just like this one person, and they don't understand that one person was a 1 in a million thing. Right. Most ordinary mortal companies, they need marketing and advertising, and that costs money. So you need the marketing buy-in.
Yeah. So it's not about waiting for users. It's about going and grabbing those users, because unless you have this lottery winning fantastic viral application that just takes off, which is never going to happen for 99.999% of businesses, you really need to have a good marketing plan, and you need to invest in that marketing plan. You need to have a way to go and grab users. And that'll depend a lot on, you know, what your company looks like. Do you have existing customer base that you can sell to? Do you have existing sales team that can go out and sell it to people? Do you have a marketing budget? Do you have the funds in order to likely lose money on your marketing efforts when you first start out? So this will depend a lot on, you know, what your business is, what your business stage is, who your customers are. But that's extremely important.
Thank you. And we have a question from Panda. Digitalizing a legacy system is never easy because the ecosystem is not ready to be integrated. How should progressive modernization be done in such a case? I believe this is related to Edo's presentation. Edo, you want to take this question?
So I think this person is maybe asking about DX, digital transformation, or something like that. Is that, if they can say in a chat or whatever?
I'll ask Panda to unmute, and then maybe
right.
he can clarify. One moment, please.
Yeah, by the way, Panda is our part-time student.
Okay, I'm just going to guess at what they were asking and answer anyway. And then
now, so he should be able to speak.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, my question was, like I'll take an example.
Yeah.
So we make some apps for a particular banking platform.
Right.
And we find like the banking IT system is made of my mainframe.
Right.
When we make isolated system with sophisticated, technology, but we find it difficult to integrate with those systems. Okay. I mean, sometimes we plan and we do a lot of things, but particularly when it comes to this ecosystem difference between different systems, we are not able to integrate. And finally, this application is not being used.
Yeah. So you probably gave the worst example you could give when you said banking, because banking, as you know, is a very, very regulated market with very, very strict rules about how customers' data is handled and all that. And a lot of times in some sensitive industries, like particular banking and all that, even if they want to, put the data in such a way that it could be, more modernized and all that, they'll claim that regulations, prevent them from doing so with good reason, to prevent, something like what happened with 7-Eleven and all that. But generally, when you're working from a legacy to a modernization, and the usual pattern is like having an in-house data center, and you have all your servers running on a rack in some room in some company. And then their idea of modernization will be like moving to the cloud. One particular strategy that everybody purports is, basically starting not just going wham bam, going everything into the into a public cloud, but a hybrid solution where you start with safer data that is easier to, that isn't really labeled as high risk, and have a long-term plan based on, regulations of what your particular industry, for example, banking, will allow to go public and how it will go public. And as you start with this hybrid system with your in-house data center and your public might not be able to do as much, but you have that public cloud, be either AWS, GCP, Microsoft Azure, or whatever, and you might have a bridge or a DMZ. And as you work with the security and risk officer as to what particular data can be accessed as a public thing, you move things over into a co area as time progresses. For sensitive industries like banking, there will, a lot of times what you can do is limited not by what your CTO wants or what you want, but what the industry wants. But for a less regulated industry, I would answer that the general procedure is to, if you have like a in-house data center, you would start with basically setting up your GCP or AWS or Azure or even IBM Cloud, whatever you prefer, and start with a hybrid approach, and then choose technologies that allow for that hybrid cloud, for example, containers or Kubernetes or something like that, and just eventually get the public exposure little by little.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Every industry has to deal with legacy code and legacy systems, and banking, it seems to be, the finance industry seems to be the one that kind of is the absolute most tricky to deal with. One other way that you could go about doing things if you have to work with existing legacy systems, and this is just kind of more broad, not specific to banking, is you can separate the data, but a lot of times, like you said, that you won't be giving the full experience without that data. So one of the things that you can do when you're starting small is to, for example, work with a small subset of that, for example, one branch or something like that, and start testing hypotheses that way. When McDonald's in Japan, when they launched their order delivery application, they didn't want to have a flood of orders coming in from their order delivery to all the chains inside of Japan, because that would cause a huge operational nightmare for McDonald's if they get a ton of orders coming in for everyone. So they started with a regional approach by launching first in a specific region, testing small, making sure that, first of all, does it work? Are they going to be able to make the orders? Are the stores going to be able to fulfill the orders? But second of all, is this going to impact our existing business? Because McDonald's has a great existing line of business of selling burgers in their stores, and they didn't want to lose out on this business by making an app and creating that existing business. But once they could verify those hypotheses on a smaller scale, it bought them a lot of internal buy-in with the rest of their business processes. Wow, this can create value for the company as a whole. So it's about creating these small successes and then figuring out how you can bring those to the rest of the company. So it's really about creating this kind of internal buy-in, figuring out, what do I need to do in order to prove to management that I can create a success with this? And what are the right kind of necessary components of this? And how do I create this experiment? And then figuring out how to prove that. But again, as regulations and all these things, especially as the organization becomes bigger and the regulations become tighter, these kind of things get more and more difficult.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next question is an entrepreneur question. What is the best way to get an app funded in 2021? I believe this person is asking how to create new business with a new app and how to get funded.
You mean like for a startup company?
Yeah, there's no way to identify who asked this question, but I guess that's what is,
So I'm going to make some assumptions here in order to answer the question. I'm assuming that they're talking about a startup, and they're talking about like getting seed money and then maybe Series A and Series B and Series C. And that would be like a 12-hour answer question normally. But also I'll try to narrow down the scope and say for Japan. I don't know if it's the best way. I mean, everybody's needs is different, but like in Japan, for example, there is actually a industry, and it's not like Kleins Perkins or all the fancy VCs you're familiar with in Silicon Valley and all that, that will help small startups and all that get capital in order to get the first amount of money in order to buy, raise your first employees. And for example, like I believe one of them in there based in Tokyo is, for example, the Incubate Fund. The Incubate Fund is basically a company that will basically teach small startups how to raise capital, and they'll introduce you to various other companies that are interested in doing it. For example, DBJ Capital, which is affiliated with the Japanese government that puts money into entrepreneurial things, and they'll give you set goals, and they'll teach your CTO and CEO, who are probably very young in their 20s and don't really have any executive experience, how to be executive and how to do the pony show and meet everything. But so to give a very generic answer to a generic question, in Japan, there's actually, and I'm assuming you're going to startup round of getting the seed money, then your Series A, then your Series B, and your Series C. There are places like the Innovate Fund, and that will basically, I used this term in a negative way earlier, so I have to be careful. They'll give you a cookie cutter process to teach you how to basically raise money and start a company if you are, say, a young CEO with a great idea in your 20s.
And if you're a GLOBIS student, we do have the GLOBIS Venture Challenge that is available for our students. If you have great app ideas, we can help you build up your business. All right, thank you, Edo. let us move on to the next question. What kind of changes should a non-Japanese company who's successful in the US but launching the same app in Japan? UX, UI features, example, DoorDash coming to Japan.
Okay. Does this person work for DoorDash, or I asked because they're a competitor for my current company, and I'm not telling you, but if I was to the biggest they're a lot better about it these days, but the biggest mistake I see Silicon Valley companies is waiting too long before they move into other non-English countries. And that gives the Japanese locals a chance to be first to the market. There is a whole industry in Japan of software companies that do nothing but they look for successful apps in the United States or Europe that have a good app, but they haven't really invested in internationalization for one reason or another. The app doesn't quite work in Japan yet. They haven't really made it a proper Japanese language version, and they say, oh, well, the Japanese people, they're fine with the English for now. We'll worry about getting the addresses and all that right later and all that. And what these companies do is they look at the apps that are in the United States, and then they take that business model and they replicate it, and they get the users and they get the initial base of loyal customers on the local Japan app. And then once a Silicon Valley company or American company is ready to go in Japan, they find they already have an entrenched competitor. And sometimes, even if they know their app is better than the entrenched competitor, getting those customers to switch to their app, even though they've now finally localized it in Japanese, they find out that it's a lot harder to do than you would think. Again, it was all about the whole viral thing. It will require a lot more marketing and a lot more PR than they would have needed if they had just, invested properly in internationalization in the first place.
Yep, and it's not just about the internationalization of the app itself. You think about DoorDash and you think about a lot of these things. The value chain of the app, it's not just getting on the app itself. It's about recruiting restaurants. It's about making payments.
Yeah.
It's about all these operational things. And those are quite difficult to do when you're coming from overseas. So a lot of times the case is these overseas apps, they're great. They're fantastic. They have a great UI, great experience, but their value chain is just not simply aligned to the Japanese market. So, when you come over to Japan and people are paying with different methods, maybe not everyone's paying with a credit card. Maybe not everyone is comfortable doing so. They don't have the customer base. They don't have the relations that they need with the restaurants. Maybe we're going to Vietnam, instead of everyone driving cars, everyone is driving around on motorbikes or something like that. We don't necessarily need car directions, we need motorbike directions. And thinking about these especially thinking not just about what's in the app, but what's outside of the app and what relies on the external infrastructure of that country to support the app itself. Taking the opposite direction, Mercari, which is like an auction application that is kind of like the eBay of Japan or something like that. They brought their app to the United States market, but it's completely different because the whole value chain from paying for something to shipping something out to receiving it is completely different in the United States than it is in Japan, where you have the logistics and the payment or something like that, relying on completely different infrastructure here. It's completely outside the realm of the application itself. So it's not just about making the app itself great, but it's about building operations that will make it a success as well.
Thank you, Alex. We have 4 more minutes and we have 11 questions, so we have to run a little bit. We have to run much faster, actually. The next question, in regards to managing tech debt, what domains are best left underdeveloped to expedite the delivery process? I'm not quite sure what tech debt is.
I know what tech debt is. And because we're running low on time, I'm going to give a very, very short answer. So things like, for example, test coverage and all that. And for example, if you have proper unit tests for every single function and all that, that is something that a company like Google or Red Hat would do and all that. It's important to have testing as part of your development process, but having a strict process like what every single function or every single unit must have a unit test immediately at the beginning, or you can't check it in and all that. As long as testing is there, you can always increase your unit test coverage in the future and all that. So for what particular domains, I would say unit test coverage initially, to give a short answer.
Thank you, Edo. All right, shall we move on to the next question? So maybe Alex can take the next question. What coding language or tech stack do you see being highly relevant in the next 5 to 10 years?
This is maybe a better technical question. Maybe better Edo handles this one, actually.
Okay, so I'll give my personal opinion here. It's really, really hard to predict hit programming coding languages and all that, but I see that Go is already kind of getting very popular very quickly and all that. But one thing that is, I think, even better for system software and is really interesting from a software engineering point of view, I'm a big fan of Rust, and I know that Rust is getting a lot of attention, not just in the industry, but also in academics, which means undergraduates that are coming out of comp sci programs now, they're heavily studying Rust and all that. So in 4 to 5 years, a lot of these young people coming out of universities will be very interested in it. So I'd say in 5 to 10 years, I'd say that you'll probably see a 10-fold increase in Rust usage.
All right, and we have another question. We have another question by Panda. This is about cybersecurity. Are native apps safer than browser-based apps with respect to the security?
So I'm assuming you're talking about smartphones and all. Though all apps on modern phones these days, they have to go through security evaluation through either Apple or Google or Amazon and all that, and they aren't really pure native. As you know, Android is virtual machine and runs in Dalvik, and there's also Swift and all that. So the answer is none of the above. You can even if the sandbox protects the smartphone from being directly attacked, and then the security audits that, for example, Google and Apple do for you when you submit an app for process and all that, your security is probably going to most likely be compromised, for example, by poor username and password handling on another part of the system, or poor personal information handling on something that is going to be outside of the app that the app happens to interact with. So I'd say none of the above to the answer to that.
All right. Okay. I know we still have 7 more questions, but I think we're running out of time. So to end this panel session, can I have just a word from Alex and Edo to wrap up this session very quickly?
Okay. So I guess if I was going to add one thing, I know that I sound maybe perhaps very bitter or cynical or snarky about how all these software companies are awful, all these software companies and engineers lie, all the software engineers that are applying to you that they can't code and all that. But I'm doing that on purpose for the sake of this presentation. I mean, obviously, I've had the pleasure of working with brilliant companies and brilliant software engineers, and I've seen some great apps. So when I've told you all these nightmare stories, I'm doing it for the sake of a learning example. Yeah, they exist and all that, but there's a lot, sometimes, you might get lucky and you might work at a place that really has their act together. So I'm being negative on purpose for the sake of this talk. There are engineers that are very, very highly competent and brilliant and all that, but for the sake of time, I didn't bring them up today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Edo. Alex?
I just want to say that this digital transformation that's happening, it's going to touch every single industry and every single function. So, right now we're talking about, build an app. But 5 years from now, this is going to be completely taken for granted. Is basically, it's not going to be, do we build it, do we not build it? It's how do we build it? How do we build the team out to do this thing? No industry is going to be untouched by this. And great digital experiences are they're not going to become a nice to have. They're going to become a necessity of doing business, regardless of what industry you are doing, unless you're operating, I don't know, creating stone tools for cavemen out there, in which case you probably have a pretty good idea of what your business is doing and where it is going in the future. But for everybody else, this is going to be an absolute necessity going forward. So, start thinking about, how do I manage creating great digital experiences? How do I get the skills to do so? How do I start working great with engineers and designers and, start talking this lingo and stuff like this, and attending this seminar is a great way to do so. And I think that I also work for GLOBIS, and I think that George is going to clue you in on maybe some other tips about how getting an MBA could be a good way to gain these kind of skills. But regardless of how you do so, it's a fantastic opportunity. And thank you for sharing this evening with us tonight. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edo. Thank you, Alex, for sharing your expertise with us. So let us put our hands together to thank the speakers. Yeah, let's do it virtually.
Jazz hands.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.